Welcome to NCBA's Cattleman's Call podcast with host Lane Nordland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cattleman's Call podcast. Lane Nordland joining you here today, and we're going to be taking a closer look at the relationship between feedlot veterinarians and nutritionists when feedlot managers are making two big decisions: buying and selling cattle. So with the insight of both professionals and how feedlots make a purchasing strategy that is best for them, and we're also going to take a peek at what feedlots are considering when evaluating premiums and discounts and branded programs. So we have a lot packed into this conversation here today. Time to introduce our guests here today. We're going to be joined by Key Jim. He has joined us before. He's founder of Feedlot Health Management Services and senior leader of animal agriculture with TELUS Agriculture. And Mr. Matt May, hailing from Eastern Colorado. He has a PhD and, of course, is a team lead and production consultant with TELUS. And Breck Hunsaker is joining us. Lives there in southern Idaho, but helps producers out in Texas and in Montana. Veterinarian, of course, and we're going to have a great conversation on an important part of the cattle industry. So first off, gentlemen, how is CattleCon 2025 going? That's where we're having this conversation. Matt, I'll start with you. How are things shaping up here this week?
Yeah, it's good. It's a great opportunity to see producers, see a lot of the partners that we get to work with on the pharmaceutical side or other vendors that we work with, and just a great opportunity to be with people.
Key, for yourself, how are things shaping up? You joined us last year on the podcast as well. How are things going, and how have things been in the last year?
Fantastic. I mean, we're going through a period of profitability here on the cattle feeding side, unlike we've ever seen historically, right? So if you don't like the cattle business now, either as a cow-calf producer or as a feedlot producer, you're never going to like it. Mm-hmm. So it's about as good as it gets right now.
Exactly. And Breck, for yourself, how are things going here in 2025 and at CattleCon? Are your feet hurting? Because CattleCon, you walk a lot around here.
Yeah, you get plenty of exercise. See lots of folks, as Matt alluded to, and the optimism is palpable, right? Lots of upbeat attitudes, and it's fun to be here.
Well, I know it's the feeding business is a tough business, and there are a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of opportunities. We know that. And right now, it's kind of a great time to be selling cattle. Those packers need cattle. We know the challenges that have come with a lower cattle inventory across North America. But a Key, from your perspective, what are the challenges of feeding cattle, not just during times like this, but in times when prices aren't the greatest either? What are some of those challenges, good and bad, when we're looking at price predictions as well?
I think one of the things we often get distracted on is when the markets are good and we're all making money, nothing matters, right? And when things start to get tough and we're losing money, then that's when we're looking around for ways of lowering cost of production, marketing better, buying better. But really, we should be doing that at all times. Right, our focus, relentless focus on procurement, production, and management practices shouldn't change basis the underlying market, right? Because the whole objective is either to make more or to lose less. But really, although we're highly profitable right now, the biggest challenge for cattle feeders is the inventory that they're currently buying at very elevated feeder prices, record high feeder prices across North America. And if you calculate the break-evens on those cattle, they're far above what the futures market is saying. Now, not that they're always right, but we're buying some pretty negative margin, so we're entering some pretty dangerous territory, based on historical experiences. So, like we should be doing all the time as feedlot operators, we should be highly focused on what we can control, right? Which is, the production practices, the buying and the selling. And, we should be trying to maximize all of those things. But as I pointed out, we should be doing that during good times and bad times, not just during bad times.
So when you are looking at buying cattle and feeding cattle too, what are some of the trends that really are important for you when you're looking at whether it's program cattle, weight? What are some of those key things that you focus on, but also want, like, say, cow-calf producers to maybe consider when looking to market their cattle and if you feed those cattle?
I think what needs to be looked at in great detail is the actual terms of the various programs that are out there, because there's a considerable number of programs, the Never Ever programs, the hormone-free programs, various programs. But what's important is to understand what your costs of production are associated with those programs, so you don't get distracted by what appears to be a premium, and when you work it all out, it may not exactly be what you see. So, which is a great thing. There's a myriad of programs available. There's lots of different marketing options for cattle, different grids that various packers offer, but all of those require, detailed analytics to determine if it really is the best thing. Right, and I think that's what producers need to realize, that there's a lot of analysis that's required to assess the cost effectiveness of the various programs that are out there.
Yep. And Matt and Breck, if at any time you want to jump in and add, feel free to do that. And maybe expanding upon kind of the current market situation when the cattle inventory is low, how do you change your strategy to make sure you're buying the cattle that you can make a profit on as well? But, a lot of people are selling everything that they have out there. When you're looking at more of those higher end calves as well, what do you need to consider? And what are what are your protocols when you're finishing certain types of cattle when it comes to maybe quality?
Well, I think when you're looking at various cattle types, the important thing, what we do a lot of is analyzing how those cattle have performed historically. So gain in conversion, morbidity and mortality, sometimes carcass characteristics. So we need to understand what the cattle are and what, within a cattle type, how they performed historically. Then we can look at, does that actually make sense? And I think, as I've watched Key over the years, it's having a wide swath. So not being so honed in on a 4-weight or an 8-weight, but what cattle make the most sense, because markets don't arbitrage, that quickly. So sometimes there'll be softer spots in the market depending on where you're looking. So knowing what your historical performance is and then being able to, enact on that if there's an opportunity, that's important.
Yep. Now, obviously, as we look at what I alluded to earlier, is obviously you have a great team, and for feedlots have great teams out there. They're veterinarians, the nutritionists. How is the knowledge that they provide so key in obviously developing these cattle, but also in your purchasing decisions when you're out looking at pens of cattle?
Yeah, so primary focus for us would be cost effectiveness, right? There's a price point for all of them. In some cases they work very well. In some cases it's quite narrow. But as diverse as this industry is, so we have lots. One of the things we're blessed with in this beef cattle industry is a lot of diversity, right? I mean, we can walk into a swine facility or a dairy on the East Coast, and we can't tell whether we're on the East Coast or whether we're in Washington State or California or whatever. That's not the case with the beef cattle industry. These cattle come from all different origins that you can imagine, including dairies, and they respond immunologically equally diverse, right? And so we have to manage them and set them up for success, and that's where we enter the equation as a consulting group.
So how do you work to really identify those areas where cattle feeders need support? As you said, it is variable depending on where they're at, what their main feed source may be. What are the tools that can be used to help them really line things out? Key?
I mean, in the summary terms, the most simple answer is that it relies entirely on collecting data, right, and establishing a database over time that allows you to define the characteristics of the population that you're purchasing, and then you use that data for your future projections on what you should pay for those cattle, right? So, I mean, the whole business is focused around data collection and data analysis and using your historical information to drive your decisions in the future.
So, Breck and Matt, using that data, working with folks out in the countryside, because you travel the countryside, you're boots on the ground, working with these individuals. What are some of the other ways that you can use that data to support them, learn more about their operations, identify weaknesses, identify those bright spots as well, to really make them as efficient as possible?
Well, I think the first thing that, when I'm in yards, it's trying to look at cattle that are behaving the way that we think they should, and then those that aren't. So when we're identifying the groups of cattle that aren't, generally from an intake standpoint, or in Breck's case, morbidity and mortality standpoint, what made that situation occur that way, and are there things we can do to mitigate the blow of that? And then maybe it's management styles or things we can work with the crew to avoid those types of issues or those type of errors going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our protocols involve everything from arrival and differentiation of the immunologic status of the cattle on arrival, as well as rehandle events throughout the feeding period, so that we can intervene and change the course of a potentially poor outcome. Right? Mm-hmm. We use the data, as Key alluded to, entirely to make those decisions. It isn't we look at the data and then we look over the fence at the cattle rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And also, as the cattle close out, what are our projections in terms of weight and profitability at that point in time, and we can make adjustments in terms of our recommendations there. I think so many times people are, as I watch this, so many times people are in love with the concept of feeding cattle or in love with the concept of raising cattle, and don't look at the profitability or the cost effectiveness closely enough, and that would be the distinguishing feature.
Well, I want to talk more about those buying decisions, but first I do want to take a second and just recognize TELUS, because when it comes to your feedlot, every decision you make is a big decision. When you work with TELUS Agriculture, you gain a team of industry-leading professionals who are able to analyze every aspect of your operation to optimize animal health and production, helping you make informed decisions that impact your margins. Visit TELUS.com/agriculture to discover how we can help you drive net profitability in your operation. And going from that informative bit of information, Breck, we are talking about those strategies of maybe, what is on a cattle feeder's mind when they're purchasing cattle, whether they're younger calves and maybe they're watching the market and that may impact what weight they are buying. Are they going to buy sick calves? Are they going to buy a program cattle? I guess, can you discuss the different strategies that a feedlot may look at, and then maybe how you help them achieve better strategies?
Yeah, I mean, it's really all about projections. How accurate are your projections? Matt alluded to this. Like, we have the data for where cattle were purchased and where they are fed and harvested, and so we use those data then to help us guide our projections in the future. The more accurate our projections, because we wouldn't ever buy cattle. We wouldn't ever buy cattle that were going to certainly lose money if we knew that was going to happen. Right? We're not doing this for aerobic exercise. Yeah. We're doing this to make money, and so. When we make projections, they need to be accurate, and the only way we can do that is with data. Yep.
And I shouldn't say sick. High risk cattle is the term I should use. So I apologize for using that. But I guess at the end of the day, when a cattle feeder is making the decision, when you're out there, how important is it, though, to have that face-to-face interaction and know that they are in the driver's seat, but those tools are available? And that's why, again, you're out there supporting them.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, the most important part of the face-to-face is getting the buy-in, getting the commitment to follow the recommendations, right? We're using the data. We're looking at a computer screen at the way cattle have behaved.
Yeah.
And then we're getting their buy-in as to what program or what outcomes may be expected.
Well, and sometimes that personal touch to data is so important too, because you can look at a spreadsheet, but walking through a question you may have, because we're in the livestock business, sometimes we don't like asking questions or putting our hand up in the presentation. Sometimes we go out in the hall after the conference and maybe talk, but it is helpful to have someone walk you through data so you know, oh, I do understand that set of information.
Interesting how many times things come up in a conversation that you didn't realize from just reading the history of the cattle. Oh, by the way, these were stuck on the freeway for 20 hours or whatever the case. That's an important part of the equation.
Now, Matt, for yourself, I know you focus on Texas as well, and being a resource out here. What are some of the conversations you have with different types of calves, whether they're preconditioned, maybe the breed? I talk a lot. I'm from Montana. We're used to a different type of cattle than cattle raised down here. But what are some of the recommendations you make when working with folks, and also what the recommendations you're making on cattle feed down here, whether they're coming up maybe from Mexico or cattle raised right here? What is that process like?
Yeah, I think there's several things to that. Understanding as much as you can about the cattle before they arrive. Where are they from? The unfortunate part is a lot of the cattle that come through the sale barn, we really don't know anything about them. Right? We know the weight, we know the gender, and we may know a general region. But so what we try to do, Breck alluded to some of the risk categories that we utilize on the health side. What we do on the production side is, we look at weight placed, and are those auction barn cattle? Are those ranch direct, whatever those may be, and then we'll start cattle at different percentages of their body weight based on some of those criteria. The feedstuffs that are available is really what's available in a given feedlot. So how are we going to utilize the feedstuffs? What are the things that we're doing on we want to have a consistent product that we're offering to those cattle, but based on the amount of information that we can get back on them, then we're just trying to help those cattle succeed when they come in the feedlot.
Yep. And so, Key, I guess you're hearing these two great guys talk about this. What are your thoughts on what they've been discussing here right now?
Well, dude, I think that the whole strategy in terms of what you're doing at your feedlot has to be to be successful. You have to base it on the information and on the data. So to me, unless you have a long-term view that you need to be data-driven, science-based, making rational decisions, right? I think that's the whole key of successful feedlot operations. To rely on your gut instinct or on your historical experience, is not really the way that you maximize production and move to the future. You have to use all of the data that's available to allow you to make the appropriate feed additive choices, technology choices, vaccine choices, antibiotic choices. I mean, you have a very large list of things that you could potentially do, right? And you need to sort that list out, right? And be able to implement the things that are, that are cost effective. And in our system, we have a very large research program basis on large scale research that informs the decisions that we're making. The results of, very well designed, very well replicated, very large field studies. That's how that's the core decision-making tool that we utilize. And our customers and producers can feel confident that when they implement those techniques on similar cattle types, they're going to get the response that they're looking for or that they project, right? I wouldn't really know how to approach it in any other way. Right. To me, other methodologies seem pretty random, right? And I think if you do that, you'll get a pretty random outcome.
What obviously the cow-calf producer is the basis of everything in the cattle business. What are tips you have for those producers listening in here about what they can maybe do better when you're evaluating data, when you're looking at these efficiencies, what fits the best need for a feedlot in a certain region. Is it an animal health program? Is it preconditioning? Is it vitamin shots? What are some of the tips that you're seeing or relating to, no matter where they're at in the United States or your region? But Breck, what are your thoughts there? What's some information that a cow-calf producer can take away here today, saying, you know what, my cattle might sell a few cents heavier if I have someone really being competitive? Because it's not just the guy buying it, it's the people also bidding against the buyer.
Yep. So having followed Key for the last 20 years or whatever it's been, it's looking at things objectively and making sure that the decisions you're making are cost effective. So so a particular buyer rep might say, look at the premium that we're getting for these calves if they're weaned. Mm-hmm. Yep. But what did it cost you to get that premium? Yeah. For me to wean a calf in my country is challenging, and the premium isn't sufficient to cover those costs, and I don't want to just cover those costs. I need profitability with that as well. Same thing with implanting. For some producers, implanting is the right thing to do, and for some, if they're tied into a natural program and have a contract, they shouldn't just throw them out there and say these are available and they haven't had anything done to them, whatever that means, right? It needs to be evaluated. Yeah. And it's amazing the different answers that you come up with in terms of what is the right thing to do when you look at it analytically using data rather than just the premium goodie, so to speak, that appears to be offered. Yep. Yeah, be very careful. Yep.
Key, same area.
Yeah, I think it would be fairly confusing at times trying to understand the buy signals that come from cattle organizations, right? So a lot of cow-calf producers have expressed a bit of frustration, going like, "Do you guys really know what you want?" Right? Because we seem like we have a bit of mixed messaging here, and really what it stems from is that in general, if we're buying groups of cattle through auction marts, right, where it's very hard for us to send out a meaningful price signal other than the average of what we're basing the cattle we're purchasing off an average projection, right? Because if we're buying multiple cattle from multiple sources and buying them in small groups, chances are we're going to approximate the average, right? The only time that true premiums and discounts can be reflected by a buyer is when you're buying direct from a ranch and you're buying a meaningful number of cattle, right, so that you can make an evaluation, and then you've got something to go back to, and then you have to have the ability to track those cattle independently in the feedlot. So unless you're buying enough cattle to make a pen, the feed conversion observation goes away. So I can tell you about your cattle, how they grew and what their carcass traits were like, but I can't tell you the most meaningful parameter, which is the feed conversion. Mm-hmm. So when I come back to you the next year, I know a little bit about your cattle, but I don't know the most important thing, right? And so a lot of times we have insufficient information to reflect the true value of what your cattle represent, right? And so the flip side of that for me, the other argument is, well, if your cattle are so wonderful, then you should feed them yourself and get all the benefit, right? And so but typically, cow-calf producers, don't want to be cattle feeders and vice versa. Now, I would like to be a cow-calf producer for the next 5 years, right? Because it's looking pretty good, right? But it's kind of you got some pretty rough years to average that against. So clearly, anybody who's survived the cattle thing to this far is going to get well rewarded, but there are some very basic things that you can do. I mean, the more uniform your cattle are, the the better they'll sell. The cattle need to be, not overly fleshy, right? So, there's some, simple things you should, in this day and age, if you didn't get your calves castrated, your male calves, you're kind of missing the point here.
Yeah.
Right, because there's some pretty steep discounts for that. So to some extent, you just have to avoid doing some really stupid things, right, to get maximum value for the cattle. And it doesn't matter what you do for the next 5 years. I'm going to overpay you anyways.
Well, and we're chuckling at that, but there are producers that they might not castrate some late calves, or they might not do it. I mean, and that's a thing too. When we're looking at premiums, it's tough to say their premiums right now when everything is so expensive too. But that's the importance for cow-calf producers to continue to have quality cattle and look at premium programs or develop their calves exactly how the best to their abilities, and have a good buyer or a set of buyers out there too. But Matt, what are your thoughts?
I mean, the guys touched on it. I think the big thing, I mean, I've talked to cow-calf producers before, and they've asked, where can I get value? And I agree with Keith. The market is never going to pay you enough for if it's genetic improvements, because we are going down to a mean. So if you do have superior cattle, the best way to get value is to participate and feed those cattle through. So, yeah, it comes with some additional risk, but that's the only true way I can see to really take advantage of those improvements that you've made in your operation at the cow-calf.
And maybe reverting back to the feeder end of things, when you're working with folks, what are some of those tools available to support them in their decisions from purchasing calves to ultimately marketing them?
Yeah, and we've touched a little bit on some of the data collection that we use. The tools that we utilize, FRM or IFHMS, those are both tools that we use every day. All the cattle are entered into those, so we know what animal health protocols that those cattle have received. And then we can look at those for growth parameters. We sort those cattle later in the feeding period using our tool called dynamic sorting. So that's a great tool for us to be able to put cattle in market groups and evaluate those, put cattle in like populations of cattle that then we can subsequently market. But also we get a barometer for where we're at performance-wise. And then there's a lot of the data admin tools where we pull data from those. Or my team helps pull a lot of data from various systems to get feed data, monitor intake data. There's various things that we can do. And then the closeout is the most important one at the end, where we can take those admin systems. Again, the important part is collecting the data and then doing something with the data. So the tools enable us to get better information and to, once we've collected that data, then make decisions from it.
Yep. So as we look to the future too, we are seeing, there's branded beef programs out there that are very prominent, but I think we're seeing more and more producers coming together and businesses that are pushing that and creating premiums and building more consumer awareness around brands. And so where do you all see branded beef programs headed, and how do feedlots need to really be aware of that, and how that could add more money into their pockets as well?
I think that I'm not totally certain that there's more branded beef programs, right, than there has been historically. I think one of the real disappointments for me in the cattle is really how few of brands we have relative to our product. You go into a wine store and you got 950 SKUs of red wine. Right, so they're making differentiation of red water fairly successfully, right? So on the beef cattle side, I mean, I just wish we had stronger brands and things that attract consumers to and loyalty to a specific thing. I mean, there are some brands, but if you take away CAB, there's precious little volume. It's a big drop to the next brand, right, in terms of size. And I think some of the things that we're seeing, a little bit more local, a little bit more regional, and producers trying to work closer with their communities in terms of getting some of this stuff going. I mean, all encouraging, right? We want that to occur, but it's been, I think, fairly disappointing to the extent that that's become a commercially, viable thing. We talk about, for example, the Never Ever programs and things like that, which, in the beef cattle thing, we all support that because we know that unless those products were available with that production system, you'd have a non-beef consumer, right? So, but again, it's like 1 to 3% of the entire supply, right? So these are niches that are out there. And, we're encouraging people, and we have many customers that are, involved in a niche program, a branded program of some kind. But in the aggregate, I would guess that it's less than 5% of the entire production, right? Disappointing to me that it's not bigger.
So what are some conversations around the water cooler with feedlot owners and managers and folks that are maybe trying to pursue a local or regional beef brand? How can we make that more profitable? Because we know it takes a lot to be able to try to sustain those. And a lot of producers I know have tried to feed their own cattle and process them themselves, and they realize there's not a lot of profit left at the end of the day. But is there opportunity, though, for feedlots to partner more with folks that maybe want to retain more ownership or own them all the way through the process? What is that conversation like?
We are all pretty enthusiastic about it until we realize that the only way we can do that is by owning packing capacity.
Yeah.
Right. So the only way you can actually get there is if you can have packing capacity. And going for the foreseeable future, packing capacity is going to be pretty negative on the balance sheet. It looks like, right? So I think where things get, they work really well, say at a cottage level, where someone has a small abattoir and they're able to process some cattle. It's getting from that 5 head to 10 head a week thing, to a next step where you're, getting into the hundreds of cattle that you need to process. And then the trouble is you've got such a gap between your cost of processing and the larger processors that gap represents all of your entire margin potential. And so you end up providing a nice service and a nice product for somebody with no margin, right? Which after a while gets a little bit no fun.
Yeah. Well, if feeding cattle was easy, the cow-calf guy would do it.
Yes,
That's
correct.
what he's. But I've enjoyed our conversation again, and I guess Matt and Breck first. Just any points I maybe missed about just your commitment to helping feeder producers out in the countryside and the tools available. But again, just the relationship you have with them as well, and in your goal of using data to help them be more successful. Breck, I'll go with you first.
I think you have to build credibility with the manager and or cattle owner as you make recommendations, and that doesn't come automatically or immediately, but over time as you work with them, then you can build that relationship, and then with the data that we have in this system, it's quite impressive in terms of head count, right? So we hear people talk about we did 20 head this way or that way, looking at different products or different strategies or different management procedures. And in the studies that we do, some of those studies have 25, 30,000 head, and that has a lot of credibility in and of itself.
Yep.
So they don't generally say, well, that's not what I saw. They say, okay, there's a decision point there. And so that those data support the credibility and the confidence in the recommendations. And so, there are times when certainly you'll have discussions or even arguments with a manager or cattle owner. We have the ability, as Key alluded to say, well, let's randomize cattle and test the question that you have. So if you're really in love with product A, whatever that is, we can randomize cattle and see precisely what product A does, not just in terms of its biologic outcome, but also in terms of its cost effectiveness, which is central to the entire industry, right?
Yep. Matt, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the big thing, people do business with people, but while we're all nice guys and we've got a lot of nice people on our team, if we didn't have the data, if we didn't have the research, if we didn't have a lot of those tools available, I think it would look much different. So, me going into a person as a private consultant versus really I've got my whole team behind me, all the data that we've collected and everything that the research that we're conducting, it makes my recommendations much easier to help facilitate those discussions. So yes, we're still doing business with people, but it's that confidence in the system and what we've generated over time that I think give them confidence in what we're doing. And as Breck alluded to, I think that's the most important part is when we have questions, because we're going to have them, new products, things don't behave the way that we think that they should. We have a system to evaluate that and make strong recommendations over time and make improvements. I think that's the most important part of what we do is that continuous improvement and looking for more cost-effective strategies.
Key, I'll let you have the floor last. What's in store for the future?
Well, it's always interesting. I've been involved in the cattle feeding business for over 40 years. Right, so then it's obviously time to get out of the way, right? But I think that I'm very optimistic about how the future looks. The same. I got out of university and had the view that science was important in beef cattle production, and that if you followed the science and you built systems that collect data and build, we didn't call it data analytics at the time, but that's what it's become. And if you could build, a team of people that, and a large team, in the build out here, we're, I think, 65 plus veterinarians and PhD animal scientists and other scientists and statisticians and various things. If you could build that nucleus of analytical power, right, you could, really make a difference in beef cattle production, and you would learn how to apply science on the procurement of cattle, on the production of cattle, and on the marketing. So our viewpoint is over time, markets do what markets do, but the things that you can control are the realm of science is the role that TELUS Agriculture can fulfill in these various cattle feeding and cow-calf operations, right, across North America and globally where we work. So for me, it's been a pretty exciting 40 years, and hopefully I got a few more left in me. I'm not sure.
Well, I think it's a pretty bright. I think you do. You heard it here on the podcast. But I do just want to say I think the future is bright for the cattle business, and there's a lot of opportunities out there. And I know TELUS is definitely helping equip cattle producers of all different breeds and all different operations out there too. So I just want to thank the three of you for taking time today during CattleCon 25 just to talk more about these resources, but again, about the future as well. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, again, as we wrap this up, we just would like to say that when it comes to your feedlot, every decision you make is a big decision. And when you work with TELUS Agriculture, you gain a team of industry-leading professionals who are able to analyze every aspect of your operation to optimize animal health and production, helping you make informed decisions that impact your margins. Visit TELUS.com/agriculture to discover how we can help you drive net profitability in your operation. Again, we want to thank you also for joining us here today, whether you're watching or listening to the podcast. Make sure and click subscribe and show your support for the Cattleman's Call podcast. With that, I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to NCBA's Cattleman's Call podcast with Lane Nordlund. For more information, visit ncba.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast today.